everyone. Welcome to this episode of Claims Never Sleep. I'm your host, Megan Henry. Today, I'm all by myself, no co-host to join me today, but that's all right because I am joined today by Sharon Ferris. And Sharon is just incredible. She has been in the claims industry for 35 years. She started off as a practicing attorney and moved over to claims and hasn't looked back since. So she's really has seen it all, has seen the industry change, and has a lot to say about what she's seen and her insights on it. And also she has a very interesting hobby that I think you'll be interested to hear about. So with that, let me bring her in.
This is the Claims Never Sleep podcast, presented by Cruiser Mitchell, with your host, Megan Henry.
Okay. Good morning, Sharon. Welcome to Claims Never Sleep. How are you today?
I'm well, Megan. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm so happy to have you. You've been I should say I was introduced to you from, it was Bill, right? Or was it Rob?
Right. Bill Mitchell?
Yeah, it was Bill who introduced me to you because you've been a long friend of the firm. And he was like, you got to talk to Sharon. She's just incredible. And you were like, I mean, I think he's building me up a little too much. But then after I got on the phone with you, I'm like, I think you're pretty incredible too, Sharon. So you want to come on the podcast? And like many of my guests on this podcast, you were like, is anyone really going to want to listen to little me talk for an hour? But I think
you.
But you've had a pretty incredible journey through claims, and I mean you've been in the industry how long? 35 years.
35 years. Yep. I was just recounting that.
Yeah. So tell me, how did you embark on your claims profession journey?
Well, I started in private practice. I graduated from law school, went to private practice. From there, I went to the Attorney General's office for a little while in the state of Connecticut. And from there, I went into the claims business at the Hartford. And it was leaving litigation to go into claims. My husband was sick at the time, and I knew I couldn't really manage it all. I couldn't help him with his health issues and be a litigator at the same time. And just at that same time, it was interesting because the industry was looking to hire in defense counsel or defense-oriented attorneys and teach them the insurance business so they could plug us into the business where they needed us.
So when you decided to go to law school, was that a plan that you had? Like, did you intend to go to law school, or were you like many of us, myself included, that just I ended up going to law school because I didn't know what else I could do with myself. So that's how I ended up there. Well, how did you end up there?
Root for that. Yeah. I wanted to be a lawyer since I was probably 15. I can go back to being 15 years old, sitting on the porch, talking to my mom about a career. And it's just a passion I've had. So it's always been there.
And so you went to Quinnipiac, right?
I did.
Yeah. So I think you and I talked about this, but I grew up in Cheshire, the neighboring town from Quinnipiac. So I'm pretty familiar with Quinnipiac, probably for different reasons. I remember going to many of a party during high school on Quinnipiac's campus. But what made you choose Quinnipiac?
My sister was living in Connecticut at the time, so I was looking at Connecticut schools. Didn't qualify for Yale. UConn also preferred New Englanders, so Quinnipiac was kind of the third next best choice, I guess.
So okay, so you weren't a Connecticut native though. So where did you grow up?
I grew up outside of Philadelphia, which is I think where you are now. Right?
I am. Yes. Well, I'm in South Jersey. Were you in the PA side or Jersey side?
PA side on the main line. I grew up in a little town called Narberth.
I love Narberth.
Cute little town outside of Philly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I went to law school at Villanova, so I lived in. I guess I technically lived in Bryn Mawr, but I mean, I'm very familiar with Narberth. Yeah.
Yes, I went to Lower Merion High School, which was Radnor would have been the Villanova High School. They were our main competitors when I was in high school. Yeah.
So when you were in law school, did you know that you wanted to go into litigation?
Always litigation. I was very involved in moot court in law school. I liked being on my feet, and I liked to argue. So it was kind of a marriage of all good things.
But did you? So I talk about this with my daughter and her friends all the time. They're in sixth grade, and her friends like, oh, I think I'd be a good lawyer. I love to argue, and I was trying to say, I was like, well, there's arguing, but it's not arguing like you think.
Yeah.
I'm like,
I agree.
there's a lot of backing up your points
Yeah.
and trying to find support for your argument. But I think, and they have this misconception in their mind that like lawyers just fight like they like preteens fight.
I did too. I completely had a misconception of what it was about. And I was much more in that mindset as well, because I just like to be contrary or whatever it was and fight my siblings or whatever.
Yes.
Um, yeah, it was a misconception. In fact, I find the smartest lawyers I've ever met have a different kind of background, like in bio or chemistry or even English,
Mhm.
because they can construct the arguments. They know how to use the language.
Yes. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm one of those weird ones that I had a math background,
Okay.
which for the LSATs made those logic games a piece of cake for me.
Right. Right. Yeah.
um, and being a math major is also different too. I'm like, no, I wasn't an accounting major. I was a math
Yeah.
major. So it's very complex concepts, and
Right.
like it's
Right.
very different from what people it's really a lot of like figuring out puzzles and logic games more or less, kind of.
Right. I could see that being an excellent background as well. So when
Yeah.
my kids were, coming out of college, didn't know what they wanted to do, I kept saying to them, develop something that you're interested in, and pick a lane before you go to law school, because otherwise you're going to be a generalist.
Mhm.
And you'd be better off if you had a lane, whether it be copyright or whatever it was going to be. But they didn't listen. They didn't go to law school, so
Oh, I
it
was gonna
doesn't
say.
matter. That's my advice. Yeah.
But at least that you were giving them advice about going to law school. Like I have a personal thing that I like when I hear current attorneys say, "Oh, I would never tell my kid to be a lawyer." I'm like, "Why?" Like,
Yeah.
and I think maybe it's because many of us had a misconception coming in. But I'm like, we don't have to give them that misconception. And I
Right.
do think
Yeah.
it's a degree that it can lead to so many things,
Yeah.
and can progress in so many ways. I just think I know I personally was not well informed, and I don't fault anyone but myself for being ill informed.
Yeah. Me too. Me too.
But I mean, even with my own kids, I'm like, yeah, like you see what they kind of see what my daily life looks like as to like my job, and they know it's busy, but it's also not. They also see that I have a pretty flexible schedule. Like I work from home. I'm home when they come home from school. I have control over my schedule more or less, except when the court doesn't allow me to.
Right.
There's all these, and claims is kind of similar too in that sense. Like it allows a lot of flexibility for, I think, for
Absolutely.
working parents. I think claims is such a incredible career path because it allows you to be, I think, present at home and be able to juggle a little bit easier than having, for at least for most places, when you can have that work from home opportunity.
Absolutely agree with you. And claims doesn't have the court setting really any, must show dates. So that was the easy transition for me out of litigation to claims. You had complete flexibility at that point.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about that. So, well, first let's back up. So you were working as a defense attorney, and
Right.
you felt like you needed to make a change for your family, right?
Right.
So at the
Exactly.
time, you were working in Connecticut?
I was working in Connecticut. And so Hartford is also used to be known as insurance capital of the world. I don't know if it
Yes.
still is.
I was like, is
Um,
it still? I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know. A lot of companies there though. And
Hmm.
so it was a great place to start that career because whoever you met, wherever they just forked out into so many different companies and different opportunities arose over time with that. Um, but yeah, I went into the Hartford, and the Hartford wanted to train people up. That's where I actually first met Bill,
Hmm.
and in the whole Cruiser Mitchell group.
Hmm.
And so they spent a lot of time teaching us coverage and teaching us how to mediate. We had schools and we had to get certified on
Hmm.
different levels, different policies. Um, Not most companies do that anymore. Not many companies anymore. So it was a time in the industry that was really super valuable to people making that transition.
Yeah. And so when you got over to Hartford, though, what kind of claims were you looking at that point?
So I was looking at national accounts.
Mm-hmm.
They would have been the largest accounts that had large deductibles or SIRs, complex policies. At that point in time, you go back 35 years. Interesting, the policies that have grown out of. We had one big, huge package policy that might have D&O in there, might have E&O in there, might have a little bit of auto with some garage and commercial and business and property. It was this major policy that these big national entities would have, and you would sort through it, and they would have a large, let's say, $250,000 SIR that they were invested in. So you would have to partner with them on these big claims, partner with the brokers. So a lot of conference calls, a lot of working out complex sort of coverage and liability issues. Now all of those pieces of that big policy have been broken off and sold in the industry as separate lines of business.
Yes, and like probably separate departments that
Yes, that's just amazing where it's gone in 30 years. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So did you have an affinity towards like a certain did you grow to have an affinity to certain types of claims at some point, or did you kind of stay general for a while?
I grew to develop an expertise in coverage, is what I would say. So it wasn't a particular type of claim,
Mm-hmm.
it was more coverage. And I think that goes back to law school where I love Civ Pro, civil procedure. Not a lot of people love civil procedure, but for me, it just
I was not
resonated.
one of them.
Yeah, it's detail, right? And it's codes and it's provisions, and you're citing an insurance policy is somewhat similar. These, it's lots of provisions, exceptions, exclusions, exceptions to exclusions, blah blah. Helps you be able to follow the ball, come all the way back to the beginning.
Yeah. Well, here's why I didn't love Civ Pro.
Okay.
When I was learning Civ Pro,
Yeah.
I didn't understand how it really came into play. It was such I think my professor or maybe myself did not do a good job at connecting how Civ Pro came into practicality. And it was just like this abstract concept, and I felt like we had to memorize all these weird things from these old cases from 18 something, and I was like, I think had it been taught in a manner that this was practically how you here's the rule, let's learn about the origin a little bit, but this is the rule and this is how you apply it, it would have made a lot more sense. But that it just was and it was also the first semester of the first year of law school, so I think it just really went over my head.
And I can see that too. But the crazy thing was, the first job I had, Civ Pro was then reinforced by a partner there who ended up becoming my husband, by the way. Another Civ Pro lover. But he taught civil practice. So we would go through the Connecticut Code that also mirrored the civil procedure, right? The practice book. And we would talk about Connecticut Code. It was all chapter 52. And we walked through chapter 52, married it up to the Connecticut practice book. So we understood how to litigate. We understood, not only was it the substance, but it was also how you maneuvered a case through the court that you could, get advantage or not. So it was reinforced later on. So maybe I didn't really grasp it totally in law school, but my first job, excellent in reinforcing that.
Once I started practicing, I remember the light bulb went off and I was like, oh,
I see why this is important. Somebody needs to know this.
But and I don't know. I mean, and there probably, maybe it was just me. I don't, but it was definitely when I started practicing, I'm like, oh, if this was how I learned it, it would have made a lot more sense at the time. But I feel like I was trying to memorize things and holdings, and it was at the beginning of law school. I was very unsure of how to kind of attack law school. I read all these books and I did all the things, but I didn't. I should have thought about it more practically at that point, and I was more into that science mindset. Okay, read, memorize.
You probably wrote excellent essays, at the end of, because you have one exam per class.
Yes.
And you had to write the blue book heck out of that one question you had, which you probably constructed beautifully. And I'm lost in the woods. I'm like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be, what's IRAC or whatever the issue rule. application conclusion, the whole thing.
I
Yeah.
was good with that. I was like, give me a
Yeah.
formula that I should follow.
Right.
So you're at the Hartford, and how long were you at the Hartford for?
Ended up being there for about 9 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was a really good stretch. And as I look back, it's one of my longer ones. I had another 9-year stretch, but a lot of jobs in between. It was another great group of people that I learned a ton about, and really became, more of an expert in my craft coverage, really. Yeah.
So what, where did you go after the Hartford, or like what pushed you to push the move somewhere else?
So the Hartford, the industry, this is 2003, they were going through some cutbacks. I wasn't targeted, but, there was a lot of disgruntledness going on in the industry and in the company. So many of us who had been there for a while decided it was an opportunity to move on. Kind of reached the pinnacle too. We came in at a very high level. They brought us defense counsel in at high levels within the claim organization. So it was pretty narrow and plus at that point I had kids. And I was working 80% time, which I don't even know if people have that option today, but no.
I don't know.
Work home, pick your baby up and feed your baby while you're on a Zoom call with your teammates.
Yes.
It's changed hugely since my beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, I do remember actually when at a law firm a friend of mine was having her first child, and then I think she went 60 or 80%, and I was like, it was like I was flabbergasted. I'm like, how are you going to be able to? And I think she worked just as much as the rest of us and just got paid less. I was like,
and that's the thing. You fall off the track. You're no longer on the upward mobility track, but you're doing the same work that everybody else is doing. But at that point, we looked at that as an opportunity, like that a company would even provide that for us. Because talking 30 years ago, right? Childcare, work-life balance, that really was minimal in the conversation.
Well, and in that time, you probably weren't working remotely, right? So
No,
probably,
it was in the office every day. Yeah.
So I mean, there would be a benefit to 80% then, because it gives you time to get away from the office to help with, get home and do whatever you need to do with your family at that point.
Absolutely.
But nowadays, I like that the remote work is just such a norm. Sometimes I feel like you might be shooting yourself in the foot if you are doing that. Just
it's true. I mean, when you put it that way, I think, I had a complete break at 3:00. I'd race out the door, race home before my kids got home from school. But there is no break now with people working remotely. You're juggling it all at the same time.
Yeah,
I don't know how you do it, actually. Yeah, you did that.
I mean, I will say, when my kids I have a middle schooler and elementary schooler, and then when they I try to pack it all in before they get home, and then when they get home, I do try to connect with them. Their post school, what happened today, to dish out the drama, let me know what's going on, and then so I have it's almost like a 30-minute break, and then the rest of the time it's I'm able to get back into it, but I just around 3 to 3:45. I'm catching up to see what the latest is.
Who did what to who today?
and every day it's and some days I'm shocked. I was like, I did not expect the day to go this way. And and some days I love when I hear drama that doesn't involve my children. I was like, it's just when they're in it, it's the worst.
Yeah. And you take it on. You own some of it too.
Oh yeah, it's the worst. Oh my goodness. Who said when they were little it was going to be the hard part? I was like, I think it's hard right now.
Yeah.
Big emotions.
Little kids, little problems. Big kids, big problems. No, you haven't heard that one. That was the one.
Yes, it's very true. Yes, just the emotions, and everything is just a big emotion, and everything's a big deal, and they don't want to listen to any of your advice.
No,
ever.
Yeah, that stays that way for a long time.
Yeah, I used to be. Especially my preteen was very good at listening to my advice, and just even yesterday, I'm like, so do you want my advice? She's like, you can give me advice. I don't know if I'm going to listen to it. I was like, okay.
Yeah. I can't stop you from talking.
Look, I'm still going to give it.
Yeah, how rewarding. I'm feeling it.
But to back up though, I remember when I first had my oldest, and I was at a firm that, people weren't really working remotely. It was definitely frowned upon. Like it wasn't, there weren't anybody, and there weren't many females, and there weren't many young parents there, or young moms. There's plenty of young
Yeah.
dads, but not. So I remember when I had her, I was like, what am I going to do? Because, I was very accustomed to, I left the office at 6 or 6:30, and then you would often do work at night, and then you'd often do work on the weekends. And I was like, well, that's not going to work anymore. Like, I'm just not going to be able to do that. And I have a daycare pickup now, and I knew I needed to leave, and I was working in Philly, so I knew I needed to leave at like 4:45 in order to, and I also didn't want her to be picked up at, 5:59.
Right. Yeah.
So I didn't really know how to handle it. So when I ended up, I didn't even ask permission. I just started
Do that.
just doing it, and I always made my hours, and then I just started quietly working from home one day a week, and I just didn't tell anybody. And I was like, they don't know where I am. Like, I could be at a deposition, and
Yeah.
and
Oh.
then and then I did it for a while. Then I just increased it to 2 days, and I didn't go more than 2 days because I knew that would start to become a little obvious. But no one ever said anything to me. But it was definitely I felt as though if I had asked, the answer would be no. So I'm like, I'm just gonna just do it, and then if someone calls me out, I'll just ask for forgiveness later.
I'm with you. And that's your instincts. I've always had those instincts too in my career because it was the best way to go, right? To get what you needed, and also to keep your foot, more than your foot, into your career. Like, you've got this commitment, this career you don't want to let go, but your priority is your home life at that point. So you're like, I'm going to see how this goes. I always felt like if you kept that priority straight, everything would be okay. It would work out.
Yeah. And I felt like, okay, like they're not going to be able to say anything to me as long as the product is still there. And, and also I was always available. If someone called, I always picked up, I was always available. I didn't necessarily say where I was. But
you don't give everything away as long as you're performing, right? But I think that's the other thing about women is like we compensate, so we become excellent performers because you're trying to do, and you don't want anyone to call you out for performance because you want to be able to do both. So you go the extra mile on your job front to become that expert or that performer.
Yes.
So you can keep doing both.
But I do remember though when I ended up moving firms and I was working for a female boss, things were much different. Like, and I was much more open because she got it too. She had a child similar ages as mine, and and she shared the mentality like, I don't care if you're working on the moon. As long as you're getting you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, and you are where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there, and you're doing quality work for our clients. Who am I to say that you need to be sitting in a physical, our office space to do it?
Bravo for her, because we are all cutting this path. There is no specific path for women in this country that are gainfully employed and also full-time moms. We don't have a structure here that supports us. Everyone has to sort of put it together themselves.
Yeah. So, well, tell me a little bit about where you are now and what you're doing now.
Okay.
And then I want to get a little bit more into claims and what you've seen change over the time. But let's hear about what you're doing right now.
Okay. So now I've kind of gone back to one of the fundamentals, I would say, I probably learned at the Hartford first, which was all of the commercial auto. I worked for a company called APSO, and that's an acronym. They are a service provider to the auto insurer industry. So all those companies out there that provide auto insurance, they have to also provide, my iPod fell out. Um, I guess it's working or not.
Yeah.
This one.
Well,
So somewhat complicated, but not really. So it boils down to, people that don't drive well, they end up in a risk pool.
mm-hmm.
Every state in the union has to have a structure, a set of statutes that's set up to provide for a risk pool. And then they rely on every carrier in that state that sells auto insurance has to provide coverage for the risk pool participants
Mm-hmm.
based on the percentage of sales, if you will, in that particular state.
Okay.
Follow me?
I following.
Oh, so they call them plans. So every state has a plan to provide coverage for their personal auto participants that need insurance because it's mandatory, right? But the voluntary market of insurance will not provide it because they're bad risks. They've had too many speeding tickets or too many whatever accident, right? Too many points on their license, and the private market says, forget it, we're not going to insure you. They have to have a mechanism to get insurance, and so they go through a company. Our company does this for 45 states. We write, and then they also decided that we needed this kind of insurance for commercial truckers, mostly during COVID when there were so many trucks on the road, but there were lots of things going on. They said, hey, APSO, can you provide commercial insurance for truckers of a last resort? So these are all the truckers that nobody else wants to insure. They come to us and they get insurance. And they operate the trucks on the road. So we have about 4,000 trucking claims a year, commercial auto trucking claims of various severity, as you can imagine, which is no joke.
Yes.
We have a third-party administrator that handles those claims, and then we monitor and manage them and the more severe claims. Yeah.
So, and I ask this a lot of people who are on this, but especially with trucking claims, you must have areas of the country that you find to be more problematic than other areas, especially in the I think especially in the commercial trucking sphere. So what are some of the areas that give you more angst when you have a claim in?
It's interesting because the ones that give me angst and why I've reconnected with Bill Mitchell in Georgia are the states that have very unfavorable bad faith law. Because in the risk business that we provide $1 million in coverage, which in trucking is not a lot of policy limit. And it's easy in a bad accident to get to that policy limit. And you have to have people recognize that and people act on that, because every state has a mechanism that says, what you need to do in those circumstances, but people don't tend to follow this. And so part of my job is reorganizing our claim department so that they understand the risks and where they are, training them to handle these kinds of files and getting the TPA to submit those claims to us timely so we can manage them. But we've run into a few bad faith roads out there. Georgia is one of them. Missouri is another. Florida is not a friendly place. Yeah. Texas. Then you can get out to California, Illinois, and New Jersey, New York. A lot of claims. However, their bad faith laws are not that unfavorable.
No. And I imagine though with some of these insureds, there needs to be some work done with them as to risk management, because I imagine if they're ones that have difficulty getting insurance elsewhere, they might not have, and I'm making some generalizations and assumptions here, but they might not have the best record keeping or the best risk prevention measures in place that need improvement. And it's almost that, when they get a claim, it's almost like an opportunity to help these companies kind of spruce up the internal risk management protocols. Do you find that? Like, I see it as an opportunity personally.
And I am all about every problem presents an opportunity, because one of the big lessons I learned early in my career. However, in this residual market, that's what they call this risk pool market. It's a market of last resort. There is no such thing. as loss control.
Yeah.
So while you might see it in the bigger trucking companies, very focused earlier in my career, I can remember doing a whole loss control effort with some paratransit non-emergency vehicles in New York, big loss control effort to, teach and work through these claim scenarios. These are where your exposures are. You can reduce your risk by doing X, Y, and Z. All about that, because when we rather take care of a problem before it happens, doesn't happen in this residual market.
Oh.
well, I'm just showing it like it is. Yeah.
Well, I would imagine though, I've had claims like this before that, that there's sometimes you can be presented with some difficulty of cooperation though as well. Do you find that is, like, cooperation from these insureds, that you might not get notice of the claim, they might not be responding to calls, they might not be as willing to work with assigned counsel?
My desk. He's been sitting at my desk. That is another major big problem with these insureds. But here's the thing: governments around the country, and I don't even know, I don't think it's the federal government, I think this came down from the states. They've decided that they want these truckers on the road. So they know that they're not reliable. They don't hire the best drivers. Like some of the drivers' records are crazy. I mean, you're like, who would hire this person? No, I'm probably giving it all away. This is what I'm probably going to have to edit out afterwards.
You can review and decide.
Okay. You can't find these insureds. They have no loss control. I mean, it's nuts. Okay. Yeah.
So, I mean, you don't, well, it's hard to combat that though too, because you don't just want to put your tail between your legs and just pay up too, because I mean there have to be defenses, right? There are, but you have to be able to work around or work with whatever their prior records, driving records may be, and kind of look at the vacuum of this individual claim, because sometimes all that stuff might be just noise, right? And it might not actually impact this particular incident. This driver may have been a terrible driver on 450 other occasions, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are a terrible driver in this occasion. So you have to kind of be creative and kind of push out those those other facts that are a distraction, because the counsel is going to use them. You have to weed through it. Yeah,
you have to weed through it and assume that the other side has weaknesses too, right? A lot of times you don't see them till near the end, or if you're at mediation and you find like, wow, I didn't know that. Things you learn about the weaknesses on the other side when you're trying to resolve these claims. But I think anyone that's writing truckers out there will tell you they're a very disfavored defendant. Right? Yeah. Jurors don't like truckers. So in many cases, we assume there's 10% liability. I mean, we don't go in with, this is completely defensible on most claims, because of this, view of the world with truckers. Now, we've all had trucker experiences on the road too, right? So, and I'm not sure many of them are favorable. In fact, I can't think of a single one I ever heard of that was favorable.
Although I do think there's been a little bit of a shift, because at least during COVID, I do feel like during that time there was a little bit more of a celebration for the trucking industry, because they were kind of keeping things afloat at a time that no one could go anywhere and do anything, and they were the ones who were bringing the food to the grocery stores that often were stripped bare, and it does seem like that now we're like back to normal.
Well, the craziest thing, now the plaintiff's bar is talking about nuclear verdicts, and they love to, cite up the trucking companies on nuclear verdicts, these 9-figure verdicts we would never even have heard of before. So, they're pointing at post-COVID juries and saying that COVID has influenced juries to the point of, where they're either disillusioned or they've experienced so much that they're giving away money that they have not previously awarded. So we're in a sort of, I think, you know what I mean? So like maybe whatever trucking ground the truckers may have gained, maybe it's being discounted by these juries.
Well, I mean, what are your thoughts too on the nuclear verdicts? Because I do feel as though it just keeps getting worse. Like I just keep hearing more and more of them, and I agree. And I feel like it's in trucking and products, like the mass products type claims, and my impression is I feel like it's growing just because they hear about it all the time, so it's normalized. So the average individual who could be sitting on a jury thinks it's normal for a jury to hand down a giant verdict in a not so giant claim, giant claim as to what we would value it.
Right. I think that's your point's well taken. That's very good work done by the plaintiff's bar. I've always felt like the plaintiff's bar was more organized than the defense bar, and able to accomplish these kind of crazy goals. You go to a mediation now, and I was at one in Miami a couple months ago, and the demand was $47 million out of the box. We had $1 million policy. I'm like, this is very interesting. I don't know how this is going to work, but he listed out all of the nuclear verdicts around the country. It was as if this slide that he put in his presentation was shared among all the plaintiffs' bar. So like, here, put this in your presentation. But that's super organized.
Yeah,
to me, that's well oiled. I don't know that the defense bar is that organized.
No, they're not. And this comes up a lot. Like I cannot even tell you how many conversations I've had with claims professionals and mostly just claims professionals on this very topic. Like we need to figure out a way to be better on the defense because the plaintiff's bar is so organized. And what's happening? Why aren't we in? One common theme that I've heard and I've talked to people about is one of the differences is I think on the defense side, there's a little more competition with attorneys for clients. And so maybe there's a less appeal to sharing, which I think personally is stupid, but it's like a playground mentality.
Yeah. We still see that, right? No matter how old we get, we still see the playground.
Yeah, we're all playing on the playground, and everyone still doesn't always play nice. But do you feel that way? That it's like maybe on the defense side, it's like, oh well, you have all these firms, and they're less likely to work together because everyone's in a way competing for the same clients, kind of. So they're not going to join together. Whereas the plaintiff's bar, it's not necessarily that. Like if they can help each other out and they're helping, it's like the water is rising for all. But I do feel we could have that same outlook on the defense side. Why can't we be as organized as that?
Plaintiff's bar seems to me to stay more localized, more regionalized, where defense firms to grow and to have spread out. And so you're looking at claims and you're handling claims, in many multiple jurisdictions where if you're an A-flight firm and you're in Miami, you're likely just in South Florida. Maybe you've opened another shop or two in Florida. Yeah. Maybe you've gone, but you're not, right? You're not like growing. And so the premier firms have also managed to keep out competition on the plaintiff side. I don't know how. I can think of 2 big firms in Connecticut. They've been the premier firms forever. They're still the premier firms. And it seems like they have banded together because according to this attorney in Miami, they're the premier, I forget what they had a name for themselves of plaintiffs firms around the country that have banded together. They have a name for themselves, like the Secret Society or something. I'm like, are you kidding me?
I'm not all that surprised because there is a
Yeah.
benefit for that too, right? So that, I mean, there's a benefit with referrals and things like that. And if you get a referral in the jurisdiction where you aren't, you can refer it out to one of the other premier firms and this other jurisdiction. I think there, and I didn't really give it that much thought before you mentioned it, but I can only think of one plaintiff's firm off the top of my head that is trying to blaze the ground and be everywhere. I think we all know what firm that is. Making a name for themselves in all 50 states.
Yeah.
But they're like
started in Florida, right? They started.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We know them well. They're in the trucking industry. We see them.
Yeah.
But I tell you what they've done. Like I give them credit. They've formalized the demand process. We get those time limit demands from them.
Mm-hmm.
They are organized. They give you the package. They give you 30 days. You don't respond, they're coming for more. They're coming for excess policy limits. So they've organized themselves where you don't see that going on in some of the other smaller firms that aren't so premier.
But don't you? I feel that's it's a bully tactic.
Oh, it completely is, but it makes you jump. From an insurance company standpoint, you jump when you see them.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, because you've been hit by them before.
Yeah, and I do see some local firms around me following that same model.
Okay.
And hey, look, they can. It's their decision how they, and maybe it probably works for them. But on my end, I find it frustrating because I like to have like a level of professionalism here, and it's like, okay, you bring a lawsuit against my client, my insured, let's talk about it. Like, we don't need to like argue this out of the gate. Like, I can hear your points, you can hear my points, like but I personally don't feel like there's a need to be like, oh yeah, I'm not gonna, oh yeah, I know I served you the complaint on this day, but I'm like, okay, well, I just got the file over to my firm. Like, can I have like a 30-day extension to look at everything? No, we don't give extensions. Like, that sort of stuff drives me insane because there's a professional courtesy. I believe in this industry that, you like, it's like, and what are you gaining from my answer? Like, Maria, what are you really gaining from my answer to complaint? What am I giving you anything besides just following a procedure? Like, no.
I agree. They're not getting it. Yeah, no. I think the professional courtesy is super important, and firms that forget that, I think that they, there was another lesson I learned early on. Years ago, life is a long alleyway filled with many trash cans.
Yes, I like that.
Yeah, so like what goes around comes around kind of thing.
Yes. I mean, and look, I think it's not to say that, you can't advocate for your case, and it's not to say that you're going to have to back down and take less than what you think your client is owed. But like, there are, there's just I think this is a professional industry. There's certain things that it's like, okay, like, I'm not trying to bamboozle you here. I'm not trying to trick you,
or
but
bully you, right?
Yeah.
Have some respect for your adversary and for the people that are involved. Yeah.
Yes. And I do find in the matters that you do have counsel that work together, it's a much more pleasant experience. And frankly, I think you still get it done, and for the number it should get done for. Sometimes I feel like the ones that put up the fight are the ones you're like, all right, guess we're just like we're just gonna have
lose some like respect along the way, and people don't give in, to their demands because they've overreached or overacted.
Yes. And sometimes though, I think it can be frustrating though, because the carrier ends up spending so much more money on defense costs because sometimes the other side is being so unreasonable. So then you have to go through all these hoops and do all these things that you probably wouldn't need to do. And you could probably get it to a resolution much faster if everyone would just come to the table. Now, of course, it doesn't happen on every case. And, but I find if everyone just plays nice in the sandbox, we can get to the end a lot cheaper for the carrier, and everyone can be a little bit unhappy and happy at the same time.
That's why I've always had respect for Bill Mitchell, because he was one of the early adopters of all of that. And he, we'd give him a file, and the first thing he'd do is call up the other side and say, "What do you really want?" We got all your papers. We got what, can we make this happen? And he would start moving the pieces around the board and say, "Well, what if I can give you this? What if you?" Then you'd get a phone call the next day or two that he's reached out. This is what's really going on. So invaluable.
Yes.
You have insight that you get so much more than just filing papers and starting up a big battle.
Yeah, I did it just yesterday. I got a new file in, and I hadn't even filed my entry yet. I just called plaintiff's counsel. I was like, seriously, what's really happening here? Like, just like,
I love it. It's like, yes.
Yeah, what are you looking for? And I'm like, I got an extension to answer because I'm like, look, maybe we can get this done in the next 30 days. Like, give me an extension. Let me try to, what do you need from me to get to make this happen? Give me some time. I'm not going to waste my time on an answer if I can get what you need, and we can close this up. And
maybe the best defense counsel out there, because you have the meat and potatoes to back it up, right? So your reputation is everything. You have an expertise. People know that if you want to battle, we'll battle. But I've got the goods. I can do that. But I think it's probably in your interest not to go down that road with me. What can we work out?
Yeah, so, and maybe you can't, but okay, let's have the talk. Let's have the discussion early on and just see what we can do here. And if we can't, we can't. And then maybe we have to go, not that after 30 days you give up, but let's see what we can do at the right out of the gate.
Yeah, the circus starts.
So, over your years though of experience, I know you said you're seeing more nuclear verdicts, but what are some pivotal changes that you've seen in the claims industry or even in the litigation industry that stick out to you, good or bad?
Good or bad. Early on, the industry, they were into a slow roll. The defense industry and the insurance company, they would assign a file out, and a suit would come in, they'd sign it to defense counsel, and they didn't care how much dust it collected at the defense firm. Mm-hmm. Nobody was monitoring really for expense, right? And they were just letting you do your thing. And over time, the industry has gotten much more aggressive on that, where they want to have control over that file. They want early resolution. They want people pushing in the industry at defense firms and partnering with you more on decision making. So I'd say from a defense, because my husband was in the defense industry and I had heard from him, and I knew what was happening. The industry was taking control, and didn't always feel good. And you don't always have people exercising control in a good way, because it really needs to be a partnership. So that's one of the biggest things. But I think you're probably already down the road on the backside of that now, where that's just the norm.
It is
the way business gets done.
Yeah, I did notice that kind of that shift. I feel like has happened more in my career though as well. Or maybe I just wasn't paying attention at the beginning, and I probably wasn't. I was a young associate. I barely understood what insurance defense was. I kind of fell into it by accident because there was no other jobs to be had. And but there was no talk amongst the higher ups that about closing files. It was more about what are the steps you take once a file is open. And that was what I was, and not that there's that you do need to know that, right? You need to know the certain steps. I just think that the change or the shift has been, do you really need to take all these steps?
Yeah.
Are they all necessary? I mean, I know they're all available for you to take, but is everyone necessary? And there was not, I don't ever recall a discussion being like, okay, how long has this file been open? What's your plan? What's your resolution plan? And maybe it was because I was young at that point and just not attuned to it, or it wasn't. I don't know.
I think a lot of firms were slow.
Yeah.
Let's face it, law firms aren't the best business managers. And so when the message was being sent, they didn't pick up the message very quickly. A lot of firms did not pick it up. You were still beating that drum 10, 15 years later. And why? You haven't gotten this message yet? Mm-hmm. We care how long a file is open. We care what the expenses are on that file. So, and we have ways to measure you now. All that e-billing, which is,
Mm-hmm.
the nightmare of the defense industry. And maybe that's part of the reason the defense industry is just more laissez-faire. It's like, the insurance industry hasn't been too kind to the industry, I would say. I don't think. And we held your rates flat for almost 20
Yes.
years.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that the industry hasn't been too helpful with moving on
Yes.
some of these things.
Yeah. When I think back to some of like the rates that I was getting when I even first started, to compare it to, I mean, you wouldn't even be able to be profitable. And like, I mean, look, like it's all a business on both sides.
Right.
But it's also the salary expectations for young
Right.
attorneys are so high now.
They've really escalated.
The cost of living is so high. Like there's just,
Yes.
it's just this compounding factor. But I will say some of the salary expectations that you get from new attorneys are astounding. And I'm like, you're not even going to be profitable. Like and you don't even know anything yet. So I don't know where they get asking for such big numbers.
I would say in the last 2 years on the claim side as well, the salaries have escalated. I mean, we're talking $20,000-$30,000 increases just because same positions. There's been big salary hikes on this side of the table too.
Yeah, and I like remember when I first started, I was just happy to have a salary.
Yeah. I have a job. Yes. I'm doing meaningful work. Yes.
I came out of law school and I had the firm I had summered at couldn't take on new associates that following fall. So that was devastating to me because I had gone there with that was the expectation, and they were more in the transactional side. And that was 2007, when real estate and everything was on a downturn. So they were shrinking in that, their practice was shrinking in that respect. So they couldn't hire the summer. So then I was panicking, like, what the heck am I going to do? I applied to every place under the sun, but everywhere was shrinking. There were even the big firms were, furloughing their summers and asking them to start later and cutting their salaries. And so I did the contract work for some time, for like 8 months. And that was the most depressing experience ever. Like, talk about going to work and just hating your job.
That's terrible.
I'm going to go to this room where all these people who are not allowed to talk, you're just like clicking on a mouse, redacting, documents.
Is that what that is? I haven't done that work, but like every now and then I threaten to go do that. I think I'm just going to go be a contract lawyer. I don't even know what it is. You're just redacting documents of production.
That's what it was for me at that time. There might be other ways, but at that time there was a lot of those big pharmaceutical litigations. So they had massive electronic productions. So they had to hire all these attorneys to do basically the redacting of these massive productions. And you get paid by the hour. There's no quality of like atmosphere of life. and then the project could end at any moment. Like, so you could,
you had to be grateful for the awful work.
Yes. Yeah. So and the whole time you're just trying to look for something else, but so was every other I remember working amongst all these people I graduated with that were in the same kind of the same boat. So I was so grateful to get any salary after that and not have to like go into a room full of 60 other people clicking away.
It's pretty miserable.
It was terrible.
Timing's everything. Sounds like it was bad timing.
Yeah, but it was an experience and I learned from it, and I can talk about it now.
Yeah.
So Sharon, I wanted to talk to you about this. It has nothing to do with claims, but I wanted to make sure we chatted about that because you have this wonderful hobby, the side hobby of sailing. And I want you to like how did this come about? And I believe I remember correctly, it's something to do with your daughters, right?
No.
Okay.
It was so my mother during COVID, we were one of those Northeasterners that relocated to Florida. She was living in an assisted living facility and it was going downhill. And she was quite depressed, and she still had a lot of energy. She goes, "Could we just get out of here and go to Florida?" So my kids were in college, actually just graduating, and they had their own lives they were starting. So I had the flexibility. So this was my time. I moved to Florida without telling them my current company, without even asking. I did
Love
a
it.
Megan.
Yes.
Sure, we'll go to Florida. I'll work remotely. Nobody will know.
Yeah. What are those palm trees in the backdrop of your Zoom
Yeah,
call?
no,
Like, just
that's where you could
redecorating.
put that thing behind. I never had a tan. I always had like a sweater or something on, and the shades drawn. Some fake background going on. But and I always had a love of boating. My father, growing up out of the Philadelphia area, went to the Jersey Shore always and he had a boat for a long time of my childhood. So there was a lot of boating going on there in Southeast Florida, and there's a sailing group near where we were living at the time. And I thought, oh, let me just go check out these sailboats. And there, I ran into a nice group of women that were sailing there, and the rest is the 5-year history here that, I can't get enough. I can't get enough sailing. I'm trying to get certified so that I can bareboat, charter my own 35 foot and go on my own cruises.
Oh, that sounds amazing. So,
yeah.
So hang on. So let's back up a
Okay.
little bit. So
Okay.
at the time when your mom proposed this idea,
Yeah.
did you have your own boat at that time, or you just found a captain to sail you and your mom down?
So it was sailing center. So in the sailing industry, you'll find sailing or community sailing centers versus yacht clubs. Most yacht clubs, people have their own boats. But these sailing community centers, they're all about teaching and trying to get new sailors into the community. So they'll have their own fleet of boats. And different centers have different types of boats, and they're usually the smaller boats. So you call them dinghies, under 16 or 18 feet, and they have a little rudder, and they might have a centerboard. Many will have two sails so that you can start and understand how the two sails operate with each other. So you learn the basics, the wind direction, how to power and depower the sails. And you start there. I mean, that's one way to do it. If you don't just go out, some people just go out and buy a boat and then they find a private lesson. They see how to operate this boat. That wasn't my course. Yeah.
So, but when you go down to it's you and your mom on this boat going to Florida.
No. We drive to Florida. We buy a house.
Okay.
And then I find the sailing center.
I wasn't following. I was like, okay.
I was jumping around.
Did you take the boat down to Florida? Okay, so you drive down to Florida, and you get more accustomed to sailing while living in a more tropical atmosphere.
Yes. I've had this dream about taking a boat to Florida, but after my last sailing lesson, that's not going to happen.
Why? What happened at that?
Well, we just got back from the Caribbean. I took a lesson towards the certification I'm trying to get, and the winds were extreme. They were in the high 20s, almost gale force up here in Rhode Island. They'd call them gale force, gusting in the mid 30s. And some reason our captain decided we still needed to go out and do this 4-day lesson, which was traveling around St. John's and mooring and anchoring. Yeah. St. John's beautiful, but the winds and the seas, they were incredible. So challenging. I almost started to rethink my passion. I'm like, I hate this. What the heck? My sister, who's not a sailor, was with me, and she's like, "Are we gonna die today?" And he says, "We're not today," but it's a good question.
But now you go on multi-day trips,
multi-day cruises and trips, and I belong to sailing outfits up here in Rhode Island. I've taken this job in Rhode Island purposefully so I could sail more and be closer to my daughter who's in Boston. And it's funny, women in my legal group have said and approached me, "I need a hobby. I'm raising kids and I don't have anything for myself. And that sailing sounds so cool." And one yesterday said, "It sounds so cool, but I don't know how to swim. Does it matter?" And I'm like, "Yeah, you might want to just...
you might want to learn how to swim.
You might want to learn how to swim."
And also, because some of the benefit of sailing is going to a place that then you can hop off the boat and snorkel or do
Yeah.
other water
Picnics.
activities. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. That's the allure for me, these great
Um,
trips where you're
so
doing that.
when you relocated to Florida during COVID, what area in Florida were you in?
Hope Sound, which was north of Jupiter and Stewart, right in between
Okay, like
those
up on the
two.
top, yeah, right.
That's actually south. It's
Okay,
just so West Palm going north,
got it,
Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West
got it.
Palm, and then you hit
Mhm,
Jupiter. The Hope Sound is more of a rural, undeveloped, less developed area than
mhm.
Stewart, Jensen Beach.
Okay.
So southeast coast there. Yeah.
So do you have any current plans for like another trip on the
Oh
horizon?
yes.
Always.
Always one. There's several. This summer I would love to do and plan to do to go out along Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket
Mhm,
and see how far up to Maine we can get and come back. So there'll be one or two of those expeditions, and we're already
mhm.
starting to talk. I'm trying to loop my kids in here because when you have a 35 or 40-foot boat, it's nice to have crew,
Yeah.
people that can handle the lines while you're at the helm. You can do it yourself, but you have to be an excellent sailor to do
Mhm.
that, and I'm just not at that caliber yet. So I'm trying to loop my kids in to come be my crew,
Yeah.
but they're very slow.
Mhm,
But the community is they love to get together. It's a wonderful sport for people to meet other people
mhm.
because sailors generally looking for other sailors because we all need crew. Everybody needs
Yeah.
crew if you're cruising these boats. And so I think that's part of the reason these community centers exist, and also to develop more competitive Olympic level type sailing communities
Yeah.
too. Um, but in the other bigger boats, you need crew.
So this is like a silly question, but I can't help but I keep thinking about it in the back of my mind. Like, what, like when you're going on a multi-day, you know, sailing cruise trip, whatever the right terminology is,
Yeah.
what do you
Mm.
bring? Like, what do you, like, because obviously you need to have your food. Like, how do you
Yeah,
pack and prepare for this?
it's like a camping trip. This is
What,
what we
which
go through.
I go camping sometimes, and it's a lot of work to prepare to go
Well,
camping.
you have to think, right? Because you don't have a lot of space, but you need
Yeah,
everything has to have a purpose and it has to be important. So you're only
yeah.
bringing those important things. Yeah. And food is one of them. So you have to kind of figure out, like what you're willing to cook and what you're not willing to cook, and make sure you have that refrigeration for
Mhm.
things that need to be cold, right? And so a lot of boats don't have water conversion. There are boats that have the ability to convert seawater to drinking water.
Mhm.
So that's something I would like on my future boat. You have to maintain those systems pretty closely because if you don't, you have to haul water. So people are hauling it's about a gallon a day per person. That's what
Mhm.
the minimum calculation is. So you're hauling big jugs of water if you're going on a 4 or 5 day cruise. Um, but you have to have all the navigation equipment, make sure you've got all the safety equipment.
Mhm.
And there's a lot to it. There's
Right. It doesn't
yeah,
sound like, I mean, it sounds like it's a lot of work, but there's a lot of reward though too. Like I'm sure that like
yeah,
once you're out there on, you know, either
open
you
water. Yeah,
open water and it's beautiful, or even
yeah,
if you anchor somewhere and
yeah,
you're like you mentioned Nantucket. Like I mean, that's a
yeah,
great way to go to Nantucket versus the
yeah.
ferry.
Right. You get to anchor in the cool harbor and swim to shore. Yeah.
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 But it's it's certainly a lot of work. I don't know a friend of mine who she lives in Connecticut, near the water, and her husband was in the Coast Guard, so they have a boat. But
Okay.
that's a little bit different. I'm like, her husband was in the Coast Guard. I'm like, he's
Yeah.
got this.
Yeah, right. He's not trying to build the skills from scratch, right? Like I've been over the last 5 years. So yeah, I'm a slower burn, and I'm also a risk reward person. I'm not putting myself out there beyond my capacity. I'm just not
Yeah.
going to do it.
No, you don't want to die, Sharon.
No, I don't want to die. I'm
You
not
just
dying
want
in
to
the
enjoy
Navy.
yourself.
And not sailing. That's not the way I'm going to go.
um, and do you ever have thoughts about like trying to do something like overseas, like in in Europe or like the Canary Islands or any of like the Greek islands or something like that? Because that seems to me like a very big bucket list item.
It is a bucket list item, and you can do it one of two ways. You fly there and then you charter a boat and you stay local, or you get these crazy sailors that go across the Atlantic in their small little boats. And I actually follow a couple of them on YouTube. And the last guy I just followed, his boat sunk in the middle of the Atlantic.
Is he okay?
Yeah, I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely not doing that. I knew I wasn't going to do that. I knew, but now, no.
I would say if you're going to go transatlantic, go on a cruise.
Yes,
ship.
Go on a cruise or fly.
Yeah. And wine and dine on the way over.
Yeah. I want to make sure I get there and without too much fanfare. Yeah. But that's a big bucket. Big bucket list.
I just couldn't imagine how lonely it would be to be on a very small boat in the middle of the Atlantic. I mean, I just imagine it feeling very very isolating.
Yeah. So these guys, the ones that are extreme or excellent, I guess I'd go excellent and then extreme in their craft of sailing. They're unusual people. I give them a lot of credit, but they're willing to put themselves out there for that adventure, that thrill, that risk, and to test themselves right under those conditions. I love hearing their stories. I think they're admirable people. I really do.
Yeah, and I'm glad they live to talk about them.
Yeah, I'm glad that they made it. I wouldn't want to be on the other end waiting and wondering,
Right.
But a lot of them have equipment too. They have satellite phones, and so they had excellent navigation equipment and people on the other end following them. So
yes, those necessary measures.
All good things.
Well, Sharon, we're out of time, but before we close up, I wanted to ask you this. I asked this of most of my guests when they come on. Knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your younger self?
I would say stop second guessing myself so much. I think, going into the insurance industry was not my first choice. When I was in law school, I loved Civ Pro. I considered myself a constitutional lawyer. I had that stretch at the AG's office where I was doing some constitutional law. And then my life sort of from a personal level took a turn where, I went into the insurance industry. And so I questioned myself the whole time I was there up until just a couple of years ago, probably.
Yeah.
So, 25, why am I here? What am I doing here? This was not my career path. This is not why I went to law school. I never saw myself working in the insurance industry.
Yeah.
They were all those big bad guys that denied claims.
Yep.
Who wanted to work for them? I mean, but I found a path and a role here and a voice, and that's accepted. It's a voice of moderation. I'm not an extremist. I don't deny everything that comes across my desk. I'm always trying to find a reasonable approach to things. And that voice resonates in this industry. And the industry also provides me the opportunity to put like a ton of my skills together and at use, because I love facts and variables. I love complicated things. I love chess and moving pieces around the board and strategizing and all these other kind of skills that were innate to who I am that have been wonderfully applied in this industry.
Yes.
So, looking back, if I could just stop second guessing myself and asking myself, what the heck am I doing here? Maybe it would have been a more enjoyable ride. Yeah.
Well, and I guess, nothing comes without its challenges, right? So but I think that is great advice as well. Like, I think we all have a tendency to second guess ourselves or like think, I don't know, or this person knows more, and it's almost like we're talking ourselves out of.
You're doing what we're doing. I know. What am I doing here? Maybe I should be a teacher. Maybe I should be a this. Maybe I should,
Well, I'm glad that you're here and that you're in the claims industry. I think you are exactly where you should be. And I'm glad you found a perfect hobby for yourself though too.
I know, right? I think that has brought it all together.
Yeah, much better
It
than
really is.
pickleball, right? Way more interesting.
Yeah. Not interested in blowing a knee out. No, it's not gonna happen.
Well, thank you so much for joining. It's been an absolute pleasure. And of course, for our listeners out there, if you like what you hear, please like and subscribe to Claims Never Sleep. You can find us on your favorite streaming platform. You can also find us on YouTube. And thanks for tuning in.
This is the Claims Never Sleep podcast, presented by Cruiser Mitchell, with your host, Megan Henry.